if any delegates have any questions, they can post them in there and we can try and get through as many as we can. We've got until 5 to 11, so we've got about 30 minutes. So if you want to kick off whenever you're ready, Ben.
Sure. Well, thanks, Sally. And I was just looking at my profile picture of myself, and I feel like I'm one of those examples of how it started and how it is now in my shorts and bare feet and t-shirt. Sorry, I feel like I should have dressed up slightly more for this morning, but I've gone completely native on the marsh. So, well, look, thanks for having me, and thanks to This Way Up for inviting me to say a few words and say hello to everyone today. And thanks for inviting sort of quite a few of my colleagues to participate in sessions as well. I think as Hugh just mentioned, there's quite a lot of ground being covered, so I won't focus on any of those particular areas in these few minutes right now. I also can't believe it's been nearly a year since I was talking to Tony Jones at the Broadway. This year has just been so wild in so many ways. Anyway, I understand we're spiritually in Bristol today.
Yeah, we're on the water with the sun.
I'd lined up a virtual background before I realised we weren't on Zoom. I was going to sort of be beaming in from the Watershed. But anyway, thank you, Watershed, for your spiritual hosting. I'm sure we'll be there next year or at some point in the future. So yeah, I want to try and be brief so there's time for a discussion. The first thing I'd like to do is commiserate with everyone on what has been a kind of monumentally painful year. I think just the unprecedented challenge of managing the welfare of our teams, our finances, communicating with our audiences, also while kind of planning into the void of opening, closing. As a cinema ourselves, I completely share your pain and appreciate the sort of almost impossible challenges that you've all faced this year. And I hope that for the most part, you feel that you're winning, even though some days it can absolutely feel like it's sort of going downhill fast. But I do think, we're a really strong community with common challenges, and that's one of the reasons why This Way Up has been such an important event over the past few years, bringing everyone together to sort of connect, share experiences, knowledge exchange, and sort of mull over the issues and challenges that we've already faced in the past few years and that we've got coming over the hill. So I think, the fact that This Way Up has been building for the past few years into this really important event means that it's and it's so much more important this year now than ever before. So thank God for This Way Up, and thanks to all of you for organising it. I do want to talk about the future, but I don't really feel I can do that without just acknowledging some of the challenges, as well as sort of reasons for optimism that have emerged from the past 9 months. And for me, I'd say that those number one positives are collaboration and professionalism as sort of two hallmarks of this sector. I've been so impressed with the way in which the whole industry really has come together to work out what we need to do to get through this pandemic. The collaboration with my colleagues at the BFI and with DCMS has really been exceptional, and it's been noted upon by sort of powers that be just how exceptional it's been. It really did mark out our sector from others in sort of the arts and culture space. So we really should take something very positive from that. Many of you will know that a task force that had originally been set up to address the Brexit decision back in 2016 was quickly reconvened with representatives from right across the sector to sort of get their heads around the current crisis and make sure that government heard and understood the challenges that we faced. And I think it was very much thanks to that and some very good evidence-based analysis, which DCMS and Treasury really love, that saw the £30 million settlement for independent cinemas that we got from the Cultural Recovery Fund, and which has been a lifeline for, and will be a lifeline for so many independent cinemas. I think you probably know this already, but 85% of eligible cinemas have applied for the health and safety or business sustainability funding. And it's been great to see such a wide regional spread of applications and awards. We've got some great data emerging. Claire Harwood's Cultural Recovery Fund dashboard. It's a thing of great beauty and will be the stuff of presentations for years to come, I'm sure. We're very oversubscribed to that fund, but we'd hope to have all the awards made over the coming weeks, and currently assessing the potential need for further funding, as I don't think the world is going to return to normal on April the 1st, obviously. Anyway, obviously, no doubt this funding has been a huge lifeline. And I think we're all very grateful to DCMS and Treasury for acknowledging the sector so loudly and confidently. But we should take a lot of credit for the fact that we were able to put together such a strong case. I think this year has also proven just how vital cultural cinema really is to the industry, as the larger supply chains for cinema were squeezed or temporarily stopped. Just noting how important cultural diversity is in terms of programming and audience development, to providing some sense of kind of forward viability. And I think that the circuits are probably going to start responding to that notion of sort of greater diversity in programming in the months and years ahead. We've also seen the critical convening role and the cultural leadership of the Film Audience Network and how that is working at its best. And we've seen that from the early deployment of the lottery resilience funding early on in sort of lockdown through to the advisory work and some of the sort of buddy systems that emerged to make sure that everyone in the sector had a good run at the cultural recovery funding. So I do hope that there is scope to continue growing not only fans membership, but your role as such a kind of vital support network in the years to come. There's been a lot of future gazing over the past few months, and we've seen it in the press, we've seen it in festival talks, and I'm sure that everyone like me has been doing your own sort of thinking about the future. And I know sort of a number of us have got quite exercised by the amount of obsessive doom mongering for cinema in certain quarters of the press. My response to that is that actually I think the new landscape for cinema will be richer and more diverse and far less monocultural going forward. I think there's sort of great cause for optimism there. But we do have to embrace a number of challenges facing us, and I know these are going to be discussed in other sessions over the next couple of days. Recovery for sure, Brexit, we can talk a little bit about perhaps, Sally, the rise of platforms, growing the next generation of cinema goers, and the persistent deficits in diversity and opportunity. I mean, I think they're all challenges that we've got to sort of tackle head on. And I know I'm sort of going to take a couple of questions on some of those topics in a moment, but just to say something quickly on the perceived challenge of streaming platforms and the future of the theatrical window. I think for many of you, the concept of the theatrical window hasn't existed for some time anyway. You've been embracing a flexible release model and work with distributors on how releases can work for you, how they work for the distributors, and how they work for audiences. COVID has definitely allowed for a greater degree of experimentation and flexibility around models. We've sort of seen that happening over the last few months. I think the question now is which of those will support a viable business model for independent film? Because it's very easy to get excited about flexibility, collapsed windows. The question is, will it support a kind of future economic model? So we already knew that the economics of independent film were in quite a fluid state, even prior to the pandemic. And we're going to be doing a major piece of economic research, probably sort of right at the start of next year, to examine the value chain for independent film and what future models might emerge as most viable for filmmakers, cinemas, exhibitors, and distributors. So look out for that, and I think we'll want you involved in some of that. My porridge has just arrived, by the way. Yeah, just my porridge maker downstairs. I think you'll also be wondering about our own future strategy and how that's going to affect you all. We're currently running through BFI 2022. I've been chief exec since February, so obviously some of my planning got interrupted temporarily, but I'm finessing my kind of forward plan, and then we will start consulting in summer next year on the successor to BFI 2022. But I want to say with confidence at the top of this session that we all want FAN to continue growing into its role into our next strategy. So, I guess just a sort of a clue as to where our next strategy is likely to go and where my head's at. Thanks to all of you who participated in this year's LFF as a part digital, part physical, and all national model working across all media. I think there are some clues there as to the type of future we're going to all be seeing. And then final thing on that is, I want to build more nimbleness into our next strategy, because I think we've realised from this year that sort of working to quite rigid 5-year plans. It's good to have a horizon line, but going forward, I think we're going to stay in a dynamic state for some time, and I'll make sure that we're building our next strategy for greater nimbleness, as well as a greater focus on access and opportunity across the UK. So those are my sort of top line thoughts. Whether you want to pick up on some of that, I know there's some questions.
Yeah, absolutely. When I listen to you talk about the importance of fan and collaboration, I think we have found that has been a big positive for this year for us, around that strength of the network. The network doesn't just exist as a funder, it exists as a network of collaboration, spirit and support, and that has really found its feet this year. And the sector, and we were so passionate about getting this way up, going this year virtual, because there would be a real hole if we stopped talking to each other about these things, and that is one of the strengths of the network and the sector. I mean, it's certainly the words that we've invented this year. So we never used to talk about pivoting, we never knew what furlough was, but when you're talking about opening and closing, and it feels like strategy is sort of getting ripped up and thrown out of the window. And I arrived this morning I'm at home in Manchester, and so the lights are off, but we're still here, and people are still working, and there's energy. And I think there's something around, it's obviously been clear this year that the BFI really recognises that value of cultural cinema and has been fighting for it along the way.
Yep.
I guess one of my first questions around that is, the CRF has and will continue to support our cinemas, but there's a whole part of the ecology that hasn't been able to apply to CRF, so around festivals and freelance. And how do you see BFI continuing to support those areas?
Excuse me. Well, obviously through this whole process, we've been clear to communicate that we've still been running an open lottery fund. I think that there were, both across our sort of audience development funds and our production funds, we realized just how much communication we had to do, that those sort of open and kind of rolling mechanisms were still there, and they are still there to support the likes of festivals and so on. The freelance space has been a really challenging one. We've had lots of right from the moment we went into lockdown, when it was clear which, who and which parts of the workforce were going to be most impacted. We all started making as many direct approaches to DCMS as possible, that they could see that we were carried by quite a large freelance workforce. I think that it seems to me that every available support package that Treasury has put together has been put together. And so beyond furlough or those schemes, for us, I think getting cinemas open, getting production up and running again was the way to try and get the freelance sector supported. So on the production side, the fact that when we went into a second round of restrictions, but that within hours, the Secretary of State had made it very clear that film and TV production could continue, was the lifeline for lots of people. But I think we've come out of kind of emergency rebuilding and start to think about the long-term resilience of our sector. One of the areas we're going to be very focused on now is workforce resilience. And the Screen Sector Task Force actually regrouped last week, and one of the topics that came out of that was around how we build up workforce resilience. And we're going to be partnering with the Coalition for Change, who've started doing a lot of work convening the TV sector and recognising the overlaps in the film and TV industries. We're going to partner with them to and work with lots of existing partners like the Film and TV charity, BEC2, and so on, to really understand how we make sure that we don't end up in a similar perilous situation in the future. So there is a forward project around workforce resilience, and particularly how we build up some sort of security around the freelance sector. Thanks,
Ben. You touched on plans for next year. I mean, coming in February, wasn't the ideal time for you this year. I mean, the strategy is due to come to an end, and you talked a bit about plans being more nimble, but do you get a sense of what those headline priorities might look like for the sector?
We're actually doing quite a lot of work across the organisation at the moment to sort of do some foundation setting to make sure that we've all kind of agreed on what our priorities are. I think, obviously number one is going to be sort of that sort of government phrase, building back better. So there'll be an element of focus on recovery, and it'll be, I think, by next summer we'll really be able to understand where our resources are needed and if they need to be sort of redeployed in any way. I mentioned it in my opening remarks, but something I'm very focused on is opportunity, and making sure that equal opportunity to film culture, to jobs, to training, to education, and I think that's going to be a major theme. And I think how we get there through sort of greater digitization, a digital strategy, working nationally and continuing to sort of decentralize, are probably going to be headlines for me. I mean, they're not strategy headlines yet, but that feels to me like a priority focus. And also just really remembering that the work that we do and the sector that we work in is a convening sector. It's a bridge builder, and it's an art form that it's very communicative. It's empathy building. It deepens our understanding of a world at a point when the world has become quite fractured and isolated. So we've all got to remember that we work in a medium that has huge power to heal and communicate. So I think making sure that there's sufficient sort of diversity of voice and opportunity within that is going to allow us to heal and communicate to maximum effect.
Thanks, Ben. Just before we go on, just to remind delegates, if you want to ask a question to Ben, if you post it on the chat, I can see that coming through, and we'll make sure we get through those. Before I move on to some other bridges, the big Brexit bridges, if we can stick with sort of BFI and the plans for the future, how do you think that BFI are going to sort of focus on workforce in terms of a more diverse workforce? How are BFI hoping to lead by example in that area?
Well, we're just about to kick off a review of the diversity standards, which I think have been a really sort of powerful tool for getting everyone to focus on what good looks like. But I do think there's some areas, particularly around workforce, that need a bit more of a push. So we're going to review and stress test within the diversity standards how we could encourage a sort of greater engagement with that sort of section B of the standards, and continue to encourage partners to adopt those standards, and hopefully a sort of slightly tougher section B of those standards. So that's number one. I think number two, beyond the standards, is probably around talking about levelling up, which again is a sort of another government phrase, but it's so important in terms of workforce. We have definitely got a national film and TV industry, and we know that there isn't enough workforce, full stop, for number one. We know there isn't enough workforce in film and TV industry, and we are going to need a workforce working in the production sector and in the exhibition sector, in the curation sector, the education sector across the UK. And I think that's going to be a big focus for us, to make sure we're investing in skills and education right across the UK. That's going to sort of start coming through quite loudly and clearly, I think, in our next strategy as well.
And is there something that directly at BFI, from an organisational point of view, that how are you sort of embedding that internally?
Do you mean in terms of our own approach to that, or how we'll facilitate that? I mean, in terms of
your own approach internally around your own sort of staffing and your own governance, and how do you kind of look at that section of the diversity standards as an organisation in itself?
Well, I was one of many CEOs who wrote a letter in the summer in sort of in the kind of Black Lives Matter conversation around commitments, and my letter was very clear. I didn't really want to write a letter, but in the end, I just felt that we were being too silent. So it has actually been quite a helpful sort of kickoff for us to kind of really focus on where our own deficits are, and we made commitments in that letter to looking at recruitment, to looking at targets that we're setting for ourselves as an organisation, and really trying to explore lots of the sort of hidden challenges I think that face a number of different groups, underrepresented groups, coming into an organisation or an institution of any kind. And so we're starting to have a conversation and explore what all those sort of brick walls are, all those barriers, what are the things that really kick people out. We've also, very happy to say, finally seen a race equality network emerging within the BFI. And we're going to be very clear that that race equality network is not there to solve the problems within the organisation, but I think it will be a sort of powerful community group, and it will be a very powerful sort of communication platform for employees with members of the organisation and the exec and myself. So we're doing a lot of work. We've got a lot to do, and the first thing I think is admitting that you've got some challenges ahead, and I think we can all, everyone on this call, can recognise that we've got some challenges, and then walk the walk.
I think we're going to pick that up in a number of discussions over the next couple of days as well. We've got diversifying British culture today, and then we've got a recruitment session as well, which will pick out on some of those kind of more practical points around where we start around diversity in our organisations.
I mean, I think the more you talk about it, the more you just see how a lack of diversity within your teams just leads to an inherent bit of tunnel vision. I mean, as much as everyone, and everyone at BFI, and I can't speak for other organisations, but I'm sure you all feel the same. Like we all do our jobs with our arms as open as possible, but we all have a very lived view of the world, and so we can apply a kind of an academic or an applied approach to diversity, but we've got to be diverse to really kind of widen that aperture. Mm-hmm. So. And you just see it in small ways, things that get forgotten, things that you look over, areas where you panic around how we sort of message or build our program. So it's just fundamental, and I think it's fundamental to innovation as well. We've got the more you sort of diversify your teams, the more innovative your work becomes. So it's as much as we feel we've got kind of broad shoulders, the truth is we haven't, and you've got to diversify your teams.
Absolutely. Let's move you on to Brexit, Ben. It's still happening, it seems. 2020 hasn't moved past it. So in a post-COVID Brexit world, feels like the future. How are the BFI planning on developing and enhancing activity and relations with the devolved regions of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland?
Well, the first thing to say is, so Brexit's happening. I mean, we still don't quite know in what form it's happening, which is pretty sort of hairy given how close to the end of the year we're getting. The truth is that on a sort of practical level, and I'd encourage everyone to keep looking at the Brexit Q&A that we run on our website, because it's very good for demystifying some concepts around, freedom of movement, qualifying, UK qualifying as European works. It's sort of, there's lots of really, really practical stuff on there for everyone on this session. And you'll have seen that last week, as part of the spending review, we secured a tranche of pilot funding for what is currently called the Global Screen Fund, which was sort of born out of a conversation we were having with DCMS about the end of the Creative Europe programme. And, it was widely reported that was not the number that we've secured for the first year is not what the kind of total value of the Creative Europe program was. I will sort of turn that around slightly and say that is definitely true, but I think in a really tough year for public spending, the fact that we secured a first year of funding is really good news, because there weren't that many creative industry programs that were supported through the spending review this year.
Yeah.
So we will be using that Global Screen Fund, and Neil Peplow and his team will be looking at that to see how that can support sort of ongoing brokerage, not just kind of across Europe, but across all our across the international film community, full stop. And there'll be more emerging on that in the next month or two. And we will continue to make sure that the very important work of connecting and communicating with our international peers and colleagues, and I know that for so many people on this call, that level of conversation and international collaboration is so important. So through the work we do through the Lottery International Fund, the work we do supporting sort of UK presence and convening at festivals, that work will continue. And I probably spend more time with quite a lot of you overseas at international festivals than I do in the UK, so we all know how important that is. In terms of how we'll work with the devolved nations, I mean, we spend a huge amount of time talking to our partners in the devolved nations, and we work together very collaboratively through the kind of COVID recovery process. I mean, actually, the work that we did on the Cultural Recovery Fund, centrally from the BFI, and obviously we're only administering an England-wide fund, but that work that we did and that evidence gathering led to a UK-wide commitment to cultural recovery for independent cinemas. So I think our work at the centre, even where there is some kind of devolved activity, is still to operate at a sort of UK-wide level and sort of set some of those expectations and policies in place. And I think the Cultural Recovery Fund was a great example of how the work we did from the BFI benefited the nations as well.
Great, thanks, Ben. We've got a couple of minutes left, and I want to make sure I get a question from the delegates. So one has just popped up here. Just bear with me 1 second. So we're aware, and we're sure that you will be, but are the BFI speaking to government about Tier 3 closures and requesting evidence as to why they are closed in Tier 3 areas?
Yeah, we've been talking about this a lot in the last couple of days. I think, look, the first thing I should say is that all through this process, we've been and had to be guided by SAGE, by Public Health England. This is how government is determining its tiering, and that is, I'd say, the sort of the dominant conversation that's happening around the tiers and the closures, and whether or not we agree with whether that feels equitable or fair. That's we're somewhat sort of bound to the fact that the SAGE advice and Public Health England is steering that conversation. But we do want to, at the very least, recognise that the challenges facing cinemas in Tier 3 closures are significant. Thankfully we have the ongoing furlough scheme, and I think that's helping lots of cinemas through that. And thanks to the Cultural Recovery Fund, despite the closure, I think that the Cultural Recovery Fund will hopefully see everyone through to the other side. But yeah, we are talking to DCMS. They're very aware that closures affect a number of sectors, not just the cinemas. But I think I don't have an easy answer to that, because I think we are all somewhat bound by the advice that's coming out of SAGE and Public Health England. So I'm not sure to what extent we will influence any changes in those decisions.
Okay. Thanks, Ben. We've got 1 minute left. So before I wrap up, I wanted to ask you something on a bit more of a personal note. Can you give us a couple of things that's helped you get through this challenging period? I mean, you come into a leadership role right at the start of all of this for BFI. What's got you through?
Professional level, lots of communication. So, talking to colleagues, really opening up communication channels as much as possible has really helped. I've actually got to know a lot of people better through this period, ironically, than previously. So that's been really important. On a personal note, walking through fields. Actually, I mean, watching films has been. This is why I think we can all kind of hold our heads up and see that there's a future. You know, there's a strong future ahead for all of us, because so many people have spent lockdown using film and TV as a switch off mechanism, and that's definitely been the case for me. So, films, walking, communicating, and I've learned how to turn off my self view on Zoom, which I recommend to everybody as a sort of as a way to not exhaust yourself, because apparently we all are so narcissistic that we spend most of our day looking at ourselves even when we think we're not. So turn off your self view and it will make your days better. There's my biggest tip.
That is a great tip to end on, absolutely. And it took me months to find that. So if anybody hasn't found that, let me know and I'll help you. Okay, I'm going to wrap us up, Ben. Thank you so much for sparing your time with us today. And hopefully we'll see you in a cinema very soon.
Have a great couple of days. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Ben. Bye.